Welcome to the Heat of Command podcast, Mastering the Art of Fire Service Leadership,
where we, your hosts, aim to teach you how to use introspection and self-reflection to be your most authentic, genuine self, leader, and human being.
And now, here are your hosts. This is Kyle Matusik.
And Carrie Henderson. Thanks for joining.
You know what the most exciting thing about right now is, Carrie? That we're actually live and in person at Teaks in San Marcos, Texas.
It's super great to be back in Texas.
We actually get to sit across the table from each other, not across computer screens 1,000 miles away. So it's been pretty exciting. You know, we're heading into day 2 at Teaks. You want to recap our day 1 and how our day went a little bit there, Carrie?
It was amazing. Excuse me. So Kyle and I presented yesterday morning 2 back-to-back sessions, part 1 and part 2, of basically everything we talk about here at our podcast, but we had to pare it down to 2 hours, 2 one-hour sessions. And we started the morning with a discussion about the generations, different generations, and how that shapes you as a human being and as an employee and coworker and supervisor, but more importantly, how it's not the end-all be-all. And then the second part of our presentation, we aimed to teach people what to do with that information and how to do some introspection and some hard work. And we talked about values a lot that we've talked about in this podcast. And then we opened up to the room and did kind of a mini Shakers Forum where people could shout out some issues or problems that they were having. And we brought up some different challenges and had people in the room kind of talk through different scenarios they'd seen personally in their workplace. Yeah,
it's always fun being in a live audience, talking to people, seeing the other issues that are going on. And, you know, there's always a lot of similarities. And I think one of the cool things is, you know, I think me and you, we don't go up there and claim to have all the answers. In fact, somebody did ask a question. I'm like, do you have the answer? Because I don't. Because a lot of the things we talk about are tough. You know, it's the hard conversations. It's the tough things. It's how to become an effective leader. And sometimes when you're a part of toxic environments, it's hard to overcome some of that stuff. And, you know, that's where a lot of questions ended up going. And it's, you know, who has those answers and how do we stay resilient? And, you know, that's a great thing about Teaks. You get to listen to other people and hear other stories, how they've overcome obstacles. And, you know, a lot of times it puts things into perspective, which is really cool. And, you know, we get to launch season 2 being live and being here, which is awesome, which we are. Season 2 is going to be full of generations and talking about separate generations. And, you know, we went into that a little bit yesterday. And today we're just going to kind of give our general outlook of what season 2 is going to look like in terms of each generation and how that plays a role in our self-reflection as leaders and how we can better lead each generation.
Yeah, I just can't say enough about the hospitality here at Teaks, and I know, Kyle, we've said it a bunch. This is where we got started speaking and traveling. It was last year here at Texas A&M's Leadership Symposium. They invited us after winning the Darley Essay Contest to come down here, and this being year 2, we're a lot more relaxed. There's some familiar faces that showed up yesterday in our class, and we're super grateful for that, and it's just been amazing being here. And this symposium is world class. If you have the opportunity to come in and attend, please do. Great speakers, very well organized. It's just wonderful. I can't say enough about it.
Yeah, the hospitality is just amazing. And there's not 8 inches of snow on the ground for me, so I'm pretty happy.
Yes. Yes. So let's get into talking about each generation that's currently in the workplace and just a little bit of overview of the life experiences that shaped some of the generations and how that plays out in their lives and some of the characteristics that they may exude, and maybe talk a little bit about how if you're in a micro generation, so coming into a generation or coming out of the early years or the late years, you may have qualities of 2 generations, which is kind of where Kyle and I probably both fall into. So you want to talk about baby boomers, Kyle?
Yeah. So when we talk about each generation, we're really talking in general. And we understand that there's caveats to each person, each individual. Even though you might fall in a generation, none of these apply to you. But a lot is the world we grew up in and how that world has shaped us. And that's what each generation is. We experience certain things, and we're not saying everybody experienced them the same way, but these are just general statements. So when we start with the baby boomers, one of the big things with them is they're starting to leave the workforce in general. Gen Xers and millennials are, the brunt of the workforce nowadays. So we have fewer baby boomers in our workforce. But I think it's still important to have an understanding. The more we understand about each other and people and why they are the way they are, that makes us better leaders. So baby boomers, it's a generation that were born to parents that fought in World War II and the Great Depression, which is a really extremely impactful time. So we see baby boomers as being really hard workers and dedicated to their jobs, giving up everything to ensure they have a job, and rightfully so. That's the world they grew up in and where most people weren't working. So when you got a job, you gave that job everything. And so much so that a lot of times their careers became a sense of their identity. And I think we see that a lot in the fire service, older generations, that this job is everything to them. And without it, there's nothing there, which is unfortunate. And that's what we work to try and change is, we should have an identity away from the work that we do. However, a lot of strengths come from the baby boomers. That hard work ethic that some may not think we have today. I would argue that it's just different. So they have that hard work ethic. They want to get promoted. They want to do well. They want to be, paid for what they do. But again, the bad thing about them is just that identity thing, that their career is everything. And I think over the generations, we started seeing that shift. And, we'll get into the other generations, but it started being looked at as a weakness instead of, hey, they noticed their parents working extremely hard and giving everything to their career. And then all of a sudden, these places fire them. They don't treat them appropriately. And so things change generation over generation. And I think it's just important that we notice those things and why these things happen, why each generation is the way they is, and why it has progressed to what it is today. Because there's a reason behind all of it, and it's not just because there's things that specifically happen. So, that's a real quick blip on baby boomers, and we'll dive deeper. We're going to do an episode on each generation and kind of go in depth a little bit more on why each one is the way they are. So our next up is Gen X, and Carrie will take away Gen X.
All right. So I am a Gen Xer. Excuse me. And Gen Xers, 1965 to 1980, what is known as the latchkey generation. And I can feel that in my soul. So latchkey kids, your mom may have been the first in your family as a woman to go into the workplace. So this was the start of more divorce in the homes and double income families. So women starting to enter the workforce more so than ever before. So kids were left to their own devices. MTV was coming out, and we grew up watching MTV and cable television and playing Atari and fending for ourselves because we were left home alone. We came home when the streetlights came on, and it was beautiful. We also watched the Berlin Wall come down, the Challenger explosion. We were shaped by a lot of social and political events that were taking place in the world. Desert Storm, Desert Shield was taking place. And we were the first generation to start thinking about work-life balance, and definitely did not master that in any sort of fashion, but started to recognize that we saw our baby boomer parents working long hours and many days without vacation. And so we started to put that into discussions in the workplace. And I think later generations have gotten much better. We can learn a lot, especially from millennials and Gen Z that are figuring out how to make this successful in the workplace. So we also have the benefit of growing up and going to high school before social media. And cell phones were really a big thing. I remember getting my first cell phone, I think towards the end of high school, but certainly couldn't take a picture on it, and definitely couldn't text on it. I don't think. So we put pre and post tech generation. So we got to see both of those worlds in the workplace. Fiercely independent workers, like to be given a lot of leeway to take projects on, but still really enjoy collaboration and working as part of a team. Um, Gen Xers, like I said, probably still pretty terrible at the work life balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting generation. I think when we look at Gen X and then into millennials, you talk about the independence, and I think that ended up being a detriment to a lot of people's growth because we are very independent people, but as we learn, going to conferences and talking to other people, and just from our own stories, we need other people in our lives to allow us to grow. And that independence is good, but we also need a team and we need a group of people that are there for each other, and I think that's very important. But it's interesting. And then me as a millennial, when I entered the workforce, it was almost kind of like I would try and find studies that said I wasn't a millennial because it was like, I don't want to associate with that generation. But as I got older and started learning more about the generation, I think it's a great generation. I think we've figured out a lot. And just like every generation, we have our strengths and we have our weaknesses as a generation. But we grew up in a much different world than my parents and my grandparents, and we grew up at the technological boom. When I was growing up, it was still playing games outside at the park, no internet. And then all of a sudden, year 2099, the internet hits and we have all this information at our fingertips. So we were able to see this and be part of having no technology to all of a sudden this technological boom. Some of the major things, world events during our time was obviously 9/11, probably being the biggest one, going to war, and being a part of that. I even remember being a young kid in the Persian Gulf, so I think there was a lot of wartime stuff going on. And, we started seeing these more and more mass shootings. The Columbine started happening. And, all these things start to shape who you are and, start putting things in your mind on how we have to survive this world. And when you start experiencing things differently, as each generation has experienced things differently, we have to adapt and overcome to those strengths and weaknesses. One of the most interesting parts, and we hit on it all the time, is, millennials got a lot of flack when we entered the workforce, and a lot of people would harp on us for the way we are. Well, the interesting fact behind that is the people that harped on us were the very people who raised us. And it's like, if you listen to previous seasons, we talk about the blame game and pointing fingers, and it's like, we need to take accountability because we may have failed to lead the generation appropriately. Growing up, everybody got a trophy for everything. And was that effective or not? So we have to learn, adapt, and grow all the time. Change, as we learned this morning in a presentation, change is living, right? If we're staying steady and status quo, we're not living. And I thought that was an awesome quote that we heard this morning. And it just makes a lot of sense how we have to continually adapt and overcome. As a parent now, with a 7 and 8-year-old, I know we're doing something wrong and we're not going to see those results for 20 years. But then it's like, hey, this is where we screwed up. Sorry, this is what I thought was right at the time. Obviously, it wasn't. But it's taking accountability for that. So, millennials they're entering leadership roles now in the workforce. We're seeing them move up the ladder, and they're the ones in charge. And, they can really be some good change agents out there if they really take these leadership roles seriously and try to progress in a reasonable way, understanding the generations that are coming up after them. So our last generation is Gen Z.
Gen Z, my favorite. And I know people think I'm probably crazy when I say that because every generation that has come into the workplace has experienced the same thing. The generations before them think they're the worst generation to ever come about. They're lazy, they don't work, but it's just different.
Right.
And when Gen X came into the workplace, the silent generation was still present in the workplace, and the baby boomers were, obviously the biggest generation. And they're looking at these MTV kids that played Atari, and they're like, these are slackers. They just want to watch music videos and play video games. And so every generation that's come into the workplace has experienced that as well. And we have to remember that when the alpha generation, which are, our kids, that are the next generation to come into the workplace, we have to remember that. And it's important to remember it both ways. So when we talk about millennials being given trophies, well, it was baby boomers or Gen Xers who were raised by really tough silent generation or baby boomer parents and didn't want their kids to experience, life. They wanted life to be easier for their kids, and they were figuring out ways that kids didn't have to experience, heartache or whatever it was, challenges and to the detriment of some people, but that was the life that they had experienced, and they wanted things to be different for their kids. So we have to think about it both ways, new generations, and when you're a younger generation, like why is that older generation doing the things that they do? So anyways, going into Gen Z, they are putting the mark on a mobile workforce. They can work from anywhere. They have been completely raised by the internet. They have information at their fingertips and have learned to maximize social media use and use it in really creative ways. They can work from anywhere, which is a challenge for public safety and jobs that require you to be somewhere physically all the time. So we have to be creative with them in the workplace. But what is beautiful about them is they really want to make a difference in their communities and in their world. So it's important for us as employers to capitalize on that, but to adapt to what they need flexibility wise. So they want to work hard and they're willing to put in long hours and to put the work in. And I don't think that's being recognized quite yet. I think it will. But they're a generation that's going to come into the workplace with less technical skills. And Kyle, you and I have talked about this, that they may not come in with experience as a plumber or an electrician or whatever working construction, but they're going to come in and be really enthusiastic about the work because the work makes a difference in their community. And we just have to maybe switch how we onboard them. So teaching them how to do their laundry may be something we start with and then moving on from there. And I know that sounds super crazy, but it's exactly what's happening in all of our workplaces right now. But just remember that they really want to be engaged and work hard and do the right thing. And you just have to kind of flip your mindset on what that looks like for your rookies. But I love their generation. I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, I always wonder why, I want somebody to explain to me, why an electrician or a plumber is a better firefighter.
They're helpful on those specific types of calls for sure. But I mean,
I don't understand just because they're in the trades, they have a better work ethic. I would argue that because in any industry, whether you work in an office or you're in the trades, you're going to have your good people, you're going to have your bad people, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where you come from. And I always ask that question. Well, why is an electrician a good firefighter? Give me, I don't understand. I just simply, and we see that it's such an old way of thinking. Yes, people used to come from the trades. They were a firefighter and then they did their trade work, on their days off. But now, the salaries that we make, this is a full-time job, the mandatory overtime we're seeing, this is all people do now. It's the profession has completely changed, right? A lot more education is going on. So again, I just constantly put in that mind, I don't understand why people from the trades are better firefighters or they get pegged as being better for the job. It literally makes no sense to me because we can make that argument about anybody,
Yeah, and I think they have a earlier grasp on building construction, I think a lot of times. Yeah. So it comes across as they probably learn the basics a little bit quicker, but I think it's easy enough to teach somebody building construction, pulling a hose off a truck and throwing a ladder without having to be an electrician first.
Right. And especially most residential construction today is lightweight. It's engineered wood. It's if we get called out for a fire 5 minutes later, this thing's fully going, don't go inside, right? We're near collapse where 30 years ago we weren't, right? It was different. And then our last generation, Generation Alpha, I always like talking about because it's my kids, right? I think they're the most hydrated generation of all.
Water bottle everywhere.
I have water bottles everywhere, all over my house, and they can't go anywhere. Even if we're taking a quick 5-minute drive to the grocery store, they need their water bottle. And I'm just like, what happened?
I saw a meme that says, I was a Gen Xer. I don't think I drank water till I was 30.
right. And then it was out of a hose, right?
Yes.
It's just so crazy. And they can't travel anywhere without it. And it's mind-boggling to me. But so they will be absolutely extremely hydrated. But I think the important thing is, as any industry out there, we have to start looking at these newer that generation. We need to look at Generation Alpha. What world are they growing up in right now? What are they seeing? They're seeing, over the last couple of years, political climates, a lot of social issues are going on, and we're seeing some of that. So how is that affecting them? And how is that going to make them in the workforce? How is that going to make them as young adults? And how do we best lead that? But we should be asking those questions now and determining and start at least collaborating on strategies so when they enter the workforce, we're ready to rock. Because I think we're seeing a detriment to doing that type of work, right? We did not prepare for Gen Z at all. We just, all of a sudden they came into the fire service and we started bad-mouthing them for what they were. Instead of 10 years out, we started looking at them, seeing the world they grew up in, and adapting our leadership strategies, changing the way we lead people so we can better, introduce them into our industry, bring them into our culture, take advantage of their strengths that they bring into our culture, and instead of having recruitment retention issues like we're seeing and saying that it's a lazy generation, we were actually proactive and it was never a problem. So I think, we have to change that mindset to be progressive and start looking forward, look 10, 15, 20 years in the industry from now. And that means we have to start looking at Gen Alpha and how to best lead those people.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think Gen Alpha is going to be so emotionally aware, and whether you agree or not with what goes on in the schools and what they teach them, it's a big deal right now where I live. But they do a lot more social emotional learning now. That is not just algebra and science and reading, and it's teaching them to be kind and empathetic and how to recognize emotions in themselves and in others and how to express that appropriately. And so they're going to expect their leaders to be on their game when it comes to emotional intelligence. So this kind of work that we're doing and teaching and talking about is super important for that generation, because they're going to see right through you when they come in, and you can't live in that world with them. So
yeah, I think you could almost, and this is just me thinking, and you can anticipate that if Gen Alpha was entering the workforce right now into, some of the cultures like the fire service, public safety, and they saw the people that are, in general, they saw our culture and people in leadership roles, I don't think they would stay. And not for the fact that they didn't want to do the job. They don't want to work with people like that. And I think, they have that ability because of what they teach in school now to be like, I don't need this. I'm going to go find something else. And it's not a lazy thing. It is surrounding yourself with people, a level of emotional intelligence that they want to be around, and people that are willing to adapt and learn that as well, meeting each other where you're at type deal. But I think that's why they're quick to leave there and see a culture that is potentially toxic. And I don't need that. I'm going to go find something else to do. And it's not that I'm lazy. It's just I don't want to be a part of that culture.
Yeah, there's so much post-COVID of nobody wants to work. Nobody wants to work. There's nobody working. And it was hard to find staff everywhere.
Right.
But unemployment rates were the lowest ever.
Yeah.
Recently unemployment has been so low. So people are working. They're just not working where you need them to be. They're working where they want to work and making good money, and working from, like I always say, a boat in the Bahamas, where you can work remote and work, 5 hours a day, 3 days a week, and make just as much money.
Yeah, when you're blaming an entire generation for being lazy. That's just taking another thing we learned earlier, taking the choice and options out of your hand, and we're just deflecting away from some real issues. So we can't point that finger. We have to look at solutions. And, unfortunately, where we are with Gen Z, we're behind the 8 ball. So we're playing catch up in our industry, at least. And are we going to catch up? Absolutely not. So it's at some point, we just got to move on, accept what is, and start focusing on the younger people that are 5 years out from joining the workforce, or 10 years out from. So our strategies change and adapt. So in 5 years, our recruitment strategies are spot on. People want to come to our culture again. That's what we need to start looking at, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. It's good stuff.
But it is all based on the generations, and it's, again, I think, what do you think is the biggest takeaway for trying to understand generations? Like, what is our real purpose for, I guess, our audience to really understand why we want you to know about different generations?
It's one of the first steps, I think, in empathy in the workplace and compassion, that it's not always just personality or how you were born. It's what you were brought up around and the experience from your parents, and that you can't do anything about that. You can do hard work and learn yourself and learn how to negotiate that internally, but it's important for people to understand that groups of people coming into your workplace may have similar characteristics. Now, we know that it is not absolutely not the end all be all. And that is probably more important to note, is that everybody has individual stuff. But if you can understand a little bit about what was going on while people were being raised, then you kind of have a jump start on things, and that can really help you.
Yeah, I think it's a twofold thing. One, for yourself personally, to kind of be like, hey, yeah, my past did kind of shape me who I was, and
Absolutely.
these are the events that were extremely impactful to me. So that makes a little bit of sense. But then, as leaders and people in leadership roles, or you want to be in a leadership role, I think it's starting to understand that we are all different. And even if me and you, experienced the same event, we were at the same event, our experience with that could be completely different, and we have to understand that. And that really goes down the road of mental health, like how it's a very individualistic thing. But as leaders, I think it's to start and understand that we are all different, and it's okay. And it's developing leadership strategies that are going to best lead people. And that means probably some change of how you grew up and how you see the world. It's trying to see the world as others have seen it and adapting yourself to that. Not getting rid of your roots and who you are and your story, like own that. But as leaders, we have to take that first step and meet people where they're at, and then teach them about us. And this is why we are at where we are at. And it's, again, collaboration, teamwork. And I think that's the fun and the joy in a lot of it.
Yeah, and it's important too as a parent and as a spouse.
Yeah.
So when I think about raising my 11-year-old, and it's so tempting for me as a mom, and I'm on the later end, I'm a younger Gen X. I'm not young, but I'm a younger Gen X. The inclination for me is to try to make his life as easy as possible, which is not good for him. So I have to be cognizant of, he's got to go through hard things.
Yeah.
He has to fail and be challenged and learn hard work. And I can't take away all of life's challenges from him, or he'll be an unsuccessful man when he grows up. So
yeah, that reminds me of video. I don't want to take credit for this. If I find the name, I'll just put it up on Facebook. But it talked about, my grandfather walked to work every day. My dad rode a bike. I drove a car. My son drove a Ferrari, and it said, hard times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. And so it's like, it's all a cycle. Yeah. So, son's driving the Ferrari, but then his kid is back to walking. So this life isn't about creating strong men and women. It's about creating warriors, and I was like, that is a really well way to put it, because yes, we want to build strong people, but we also have to prepare them for war of what this world is, right?
Yeah.
And we're not just saying war and battle, but it's just what daily living really is, because there are ups and downs in life. So yeah, there's being strong, and then there's being a warrior. So we continually just progress instead of making it a cyclical thing where we come back around to walking. And I always find that fascinating. You brought up a great point there.
My goal with him is always, definitely not to make him have experienced failure, but to know what it feels like to put the hard work in to get over something, to accomplish or to work through something that's a challenge, so that to try to build some resiliency, because there's so much tough stuff, that our kids have to go through, and I don't want him to give up. Just keep trying whatever it is. Like as simple as learning to tie your shoes. It's not going to be easy the first time, but this feeling of success and resiliency when you can finally work through something is my goal. Yeah.
A big thing, for me is, and I mentioned it this episode, is finding people that are going to support you. And, I have 2 young girls, and it's for a dad, that's just a very interesting spot. And it's finding places that are going to help you achieve your mission for your kids, right? And putting them in circles where they have a positive influence outside of me and my wife, because I think that's very important as well. Fortunately for us, where we're at, we have found those two places for our daughters, and it's important to us because it's on that path of how do I create warriors? Yeah, I can do it, but I also need outside influence as well, and it's building that team of people, and when we say all this stuff, it's crazy how much we have just lost a sense of community. And when you have a strong community of people around you, so many good things can happen, and influences and guidance and mentorship, because we can't do it all alone. And I think setting those teams up for our kids and ourselves is very important. It's interesting as an adult to go out and kind of build your team. Like, how do you do it as a 39, 40-year-old that walks up, hey, will you,
Would you be my friend?
would you be my friend, or you be my mentor? Like, how do you do that? It's very challenging, because a lot of times I've asked that question and I get a look like I've been asked, wait, you want me to be your mentor? Yeah. And like, I need that to grow. I have weaknesses that I can't solve on my own. But you get looked at kind of funny, so it's looking at my kids as like, how can I build that team for them now, and understand like community is one of the most important things you will ever have in your life. You need your group of people, because they will pick you up when you're down. You'll pick them up when they're down, and they'll lead you, because they're going to have strengths that you don't have, and you're going to have strengths they don't have. And that's where, everything works in good communion with each other. And it's what life is about.
Yes, it's beautiful. I have a beautiful tribe of people, and it makes life much easier.
Yeah, I'm building mine, which is interesting. But grateful for you and the people that have come into my life recently that have steered me in a direction, and it's just very interesting where it's all going. So, yeah. Well, that's a little look at episode 1 for season 2, where we go into the generations a little bit more, bring in some live interviews as well, where we get to talk to specific generations and see what they're doing, what they're about. And we really look forward to sharing some more of that with you.
Awesome.
As we wrap up another episode, this has been Kyle
and Carrie
from the Heat of Command podcast.
Thank you, as always, for listening. Please make sure to follow and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And as always, we love the feedback. Keep it coming.
See you next time.